This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse, murder, and their families. I'm your host, Laine, and this is episode 196, Savayah Mason. On August 24, 2020, 23-year-old Luis Luna ran into the living room of his shared Houston apartment in a panic, holding his unresponsive 8-month-old daughter, Savayah Mason. Despite an immediate 911 call, Savayah didn't make it. An autopsy found horrific injuries, and Savayah's death was ruled a homicide caused by multiple blunt force injuries with suffocation and sexual assault. A week later, her father was arrested and charged with capital murder. This is the story of an adorable baby girl whose short life ended in the most brutal way possible. It's also the story of a young father whose possibly drug-fueled impulses led him to commit an unthinkable crime against his own helpless infant daughter. This is the disturbing story of Savayah Mason. Although Savayah's mom, Eunice, opted not to speak on the podcast, this episode was made with her input. I won't cover a child's story without the family's permission. It's worth mentioning that very little about Savayah's case made it into the news. I originally covered her story on my now-defunct blog in 2020, and for 4 years, there were no news updates about it whatsoever. Earlier this month, when I requested case documentation from the Harris County District Attorney's Office, they cited Texas Family Code Section 261.201A2, which surrounds the confidentiality of information about a case involving child abuse, as the reason the Attorney General's office instructed them to withhold the case, even though the child in question died as a result of the abuse. Because of this, aside from the autopsy report, much of the available information about Savayah's case comes from an appellate brief filed by the man convicted of her murder, and it's important to remember that's a document written in his defense by his defense attorney. While it includes useful timestamps and text logs, it also reflects his framing of events, which this episode does not wholly accept at face value. So I did my best to put Savayah's story together with the sources I had, and I hope I've done this sweet little girl's story justice. Eunice Mason and Luis Luna met in the mid-2010s when they both attended George Bush High School in Richmond, Texas, a suburb of Houston. The two had an on-again, off-again relationship. When Luis was 21 and Eunice was 19, they learned they were expecting a baby together. Savayah Simone Mason was born full-term on December 7, 2019, weighing 6 pounds, 9 ounces in Galloway Township, New Jersey. She was a gorgeous baby with the cutest chubby cheeks, a sweet, toothless little smile, thick, curly black hair, and the most beautiful brown eyes you can imagine. After their daughter was born, Eunice saw Luis occasionally. When Luis moved into an apartment, Eunice started taking Savayah to see him more often, around 3 or 4 times a week. Apartment 323 at the Cape Colony apartment complex in Houston was, let's say, a little cramped. It was a 1-bedroom apartment with 6 young men living together. You might want to take notes during this part. The names and familial relationships are going to get confusing fast. Luis lived with Trevante Moulton, known as Vaughn, Vaughn's twin brother, Treverton Moulton, known as Julio, the twins' brother, Trevington Moulton, known as Juice, the Moultons' half-brother, Ladarian Watson, known as L-Dog, and finally, Henry Matthews, Juice's partner, known as Juvie. Of the 6 men living in the apartment, only one, Vaughn, had a key because he paid the rent. If the others wanted in, they had to knock. The apartment had a small, enclosed sunroom just off the living room, which served as Luis's bedroom because he paid part of the rent and had a child. According to court documents, the other 5 men slept wherever was convenient. By the summer of 2020, Luis had a girlfriend named Ashley, but he also continued his relationship with Eunice. The young parents communicated through Instagram messages and reportedly argued semi-often. When Eunice would bring Savayah to visit her father, she'd carry the baby up to the apartment in her car seat, bringing along everything Savayah needed, including diapers, wipes, formula, a diaper bag, extra clothes, and blankets. Sometimes Eunice left Savayah with Luis, and other times she'd stay during the visit. Sometimes she and Savayah both spent the night at the apartment, and all three of them would sleep on Luis's air mattress. Eunice refused to let Savayah sleep in her car seat because she had heard it was unsafe. She was right about that. It's not recommended for babies under a year to sleep for long periods in their car seats, upright strollers, and baby swings because of the risk of positional asphyxiation. Short car naps are fine as long as the car seat is installed correctly and the baby is buckled in safely with sufficiently tight straps to prevent the head from slumping forward. When Savayah visited, Luis sometimes brought her into the living room with his roommates, who later made statements about how he interacted with his daughter. Vaughn described him as a loving father, adding that Luis took care of Savayah and didn't do anything to harm her. Juice echoed those statements, while Juvie said Luis was an amazing father and described him as very protective. Also calling Luis the perfect father, Juvie added that Luis fed, bathed, dressed, and diapered the baby. At times, the roommates would watch Savayah, sometimes in the living room and sometimes in the sunroom, while Luis would go off and do something with a girl or go to the store. They said when he ran errands, he would return quickly. Most of the timeline I'm about to give comes from the appellate brief I mentioned in the intro. Savayah stayed overnight at her father's apartment on Thursday, August 20th, 2020, based on photos and text messages found on his phone. That evening, Luis texted Ash, who I'm assuming was his girlfriend Ashley, telling her he had Savayah that night. Again, based on text messages, Eunice also spent the night. The next morning, Luis texted Ashley that Savayah finally fell asleep around 3 a.m. To me, it sounds like he was actively juggling relationships with both women that possibly neither knew about. Around dinner time on Friday, August 21st, Luis asked Eunice to drop Savayah off with him, almost immediately texting Ashley that Savayah was trying to watch her show. 4 hours later, he texted Ashley to complain that the baby no longer went to sleep at 9 p.m. Less than an hour after that, he texted Eunice, "You can come." More juggling on his part. Around midnight, Eunice texted that she was on her way, and Luis responded with, "Never mind, you've taken too long," which started an argument between the two. Near 1 a.m., Eunice texted that she was on her way. Luis right away texted Ashley that Savayah just fell asleep. Eunice testified at trial that she dropped Savayah off between 10 and 11 p.m. that night, and that she and Luis got into an argument because she thought he had another girl in the apartment with him. She went upstairs to see for herself, but the only girl present was baby Savayah in her car seat. In a short video on roommate Vaughn's phone, recorded on Saturday, August 22nd, Savayah looked healthy with no visible injuries. The same day, around noon, Luis texted Ashley that he was feeding Savayah, adding that the baby might live with him for now. That afternoon, at Luis's request, Eunice agreed that Savayah could stay with him for the weekend, and that she would bring over some clothes and snacks later. Luis recorded a brief video on his phone, showing him lying next to a sleeping Savayah on his air mattress in the sunroom. At 6:53 p.m., Eunice texted to ask if Savayah was okay, and Luis told her she was. Luis later texted Ashley to invite her to come over the following day to see him and Savayah. I've said this before. Making this podcast and freelance writing is exhausting in more ways than one, and when I have no mental energy, focus is a lost cause. That got me thinking about how focus and energy are connected. As much as I wish I could, focus is something that just can't be forced. I've tried everything: time blocking, bullet journaling, the Pomodoro technique, and I have no idea how many others. So even though I can't force focus, one thing I can do is regulate my energy. What does that even mean? There have been many days when I've slammed an extra giant mug of coffee just to get me through the day, but that's just like a quick burst of I have to get everything done right now energy, and within a couple hours I just need a nap. Then there's the kind of energy that keeps me rooted to my desk, my eyes on my computer screen, and my brain fully immersed in what I'm trying to do, whether it's writing a random blog post about the dangers of improper attic ventilation or researching a heartbreaking case like Savayah's. You all know I've been working with Magic Mind for a while now. I'm thrilled to have them as a sponsor because I love, and I mean love, their products, and I'm not just saying that because they are a sponsor. Rarely a day goes by when I don't take my little green shot. So when they reached out and asked me to try something new, I was totally on board. I was so excited when the box showed up on my doorstep last week. That little green shot I love so much, it now comes in 3 formulas. Original, of course. Then there's Free, which is the world's first caffeine-free energy shot. And finally, Max, which has 3 times the caffeine of the original formula, but it's time-released caffeine, so it's not a big burst and then a crash. I'll start with the original formula because I've been using it for months. That mental performance shot has really helped me with mental clarity, focus, and calm energy. Not the bouncing off the walls and then falling into bed kind. It has a moderate amount of caffeine, and it keeps me focused throughout the day. I figured I'd experiment with the 2 new formulas for 2 consecutive days each. I started with Free. I took it in the early afternoon, not really expecting much, but I was surprised how well I actually stayed on track that day, even without my usual morning shot. Same thing the next day, although I took Free mid-morning. My focus was definitely better than when I don't take a shot at all, but I'll admit I need that caffeine to keep me going. So I finished my little experiment by taking Max 2 days in a row, and ding ding, we have a winner. It didn't whack me over the head like extra coffee would, but I had more sustained energy and focus throughout the day, and I didn't even think about taking a nap, which might qualify as a minor miracle in my world. I even wrote 2 articles in one day, and that's unheard of for me. Plus, I managed to knock a couple items off my to-do list that I had figured might get done around the turn of the next century. Most amazing of all, the second day, I didn't even have time to drink coffee before I had to leave the house, so I just threw back that Max shot, and I swear to you, I didn't miss my coffee a single bit. I never thought I'd say that. I love the way the caffeine doesn't release all at once, but over maybe 3 to 4 hours instead, so my energy is a lot more even. The science is a bit over my head, but it's able to do this because of the L-theanine the shot contains, and a technique called nano-encapsulation, which I think is sorcery, but Magic Mind insists it's just science. For anybody who doesn't get enough sleep and has a million things to do at all times, I would seriously recommend Max. I'm switching my subscription to Max for sure. Now that they're launching the 2 new formulas, Magic Mind has a limited offer, and it's the biggest discount they've ever done, so grab it while you can. Visit my link, magicmind.com/LaineMF, and use my code LAINE60 for 60% off your subscription. And don't worry, if you don't love it like I do, you can cancel the subscription anytime. And they have a 100% money-back guarantee, no questions asked. That's magicmind.com/LAINEMF and use code LAINE60. All that said, back to Savayah's story. On Sunday, August 23rd, roommates Vaughn and Juvie later said that Savayah spent most of her day in the sunroom. Luis texted Ashley around lunchtime, telling her he'd just bathed Savayah. That afternoon, he brought the baby out to the living room for a little while to interact with his roommates. Later, Vaughn, Juvie, and L-Dog would say Savayah seemed happy and healthy and had no apparent injuries. Eventually, Luis took the baby back into the sunroom. Around 1 p.m., Luis texted Ashley about getting married, making sure she was coming to visit that evening. About an hour later, he texted an unknown person, asking him to bring a gram. That individual pulled up at 3:11 p.m., exchanging some calls with Luis, who soon afterward texted Ashley, "We gon' see straight, baby." It sounds like he could have been alluding to cocaine rather than the marijuana his roommates, who were in and out all afternoon, were admittedly using. At 4 o'clock, Luis sent Yanis a photo of Savayah, which he had taken on Thursday. He asked if Savayah could stay with him for a week so he could take her to see his people, to which Yanis agreed, saying she would stop by shortly to see Savayah for a bit and drop off more things she would need for the week. Luis argued against this, saying, "She has everything," and insisting he was taking Savayah out visiting today, leading to an argument. He did not, in fact, take Savayah anywhere. Luis fed Savayah a vegetable squeeze pouch and some formula for dinner. Just after 6 p.m., he texted Ashley, asking again if she was going to visit and telling her he was going down for a nap with the baby. When roommate Juice returned between 8 and 9 o'clock that evening, the apartment was dark and the sunroom door was closed. Vaughn and Juvie were asleep on the living room couches, and Juice also fell asleep in the living room. After a small amount of phone activity, Luis's phone was locked at 8:55 and stayed that way until 11:43 p.m. During that gap, he missed messages from Yanis, Ashley, and someone listed as Bree. He responded to those messages between 11:43 and 12:17 a.m. Meanwhile, another roommate, L-Dog, returned home around 11 p.m. and saw Vaughn, Juvie, and Juice asleep in the living room. Another friend, Ryan Zhang, who didn't live with them and had come in after Juice, was in the bedroom, awake. Around midnight, Vaughn later said, he woke up and saw Luis in the apartment, although Savayah wasn't with him and the lights in the sunroom were turned off. I'll pause here for a quick word from my sponsors. Just after midnight on Monday, August 24, 2020, the four roommates who were sleeping in the living room, Vaughn, Juvie, Juice, and L-Dog, awoke to hear Luis screaming that Savayah couldn't breathe as he ran out of the sunroom, holding the baby in the air. Savayah was pale, her lips were blue, there was foam coming from her mouth, and it looked like her chest was caving in. She wasn't breathing and appeared lifeless. According to the appellate brief, L-Dog later said that Savayah had a belt mark on her neck that looked like somebody had tried to tie something real tight to suffocate her. The brief also stated, he immediately backtracked and called the mark little, however. He clarified that by belt, he meant the belts on the car seat. The four roommates later described Luis's demeanor as hysterical, frantic, scared, panicking, freaking out, shocked, and distraught. Luis put the baby down and tried to give CPR, doing, according to Vaughn, everything he could. It was 12:22 a.m. when Vaughn called 911, telling the operator several conflicting statements. That Savayah was not breathing, that she was conscious and struggling to breathe, that she was not awake but was breathing a little bit, that they could hear her breathing but her eyes were closed, that she was not responsive, and finally, that she was not breathing. I can imagine that in the chaos of the situation, it would be almost impossible to tell what Savayah's condition was and whether she was breathing. Following the 911 operator's instructions, Luis continued giving his daughter CPR, which caused the baby to make a sound. The operator asked, "Is that the baby?" To which Luis and Vaughn both replied, "Yes." Both told the operator repeatedly that they could hear Savayah breathing. In the 911 recording of that call, Luis said in the background, the belt part was around her neck. His roommates later remembered bits and pieces of what he told them. Vaughn remembered Luis saying he had left the baby in her car seat. Juice recalled Luis telling them Savayah was in her car seat and maybe the straps are too tight. L-Dog's recollection was that Luis said he left her in the car seat accidentally with the straps too tight, and she basically choked. L-Dog then clarified that Luis had said the car seat's belts were tied too tight, and that Savayah choked due to the belt tied around the neck. First responders, including EMTs and Harris County police deputies, responded quickly to the apartment complex at 15035 West Park Drive in Houston on a call about an unresponsive infant. Luis was still performing CPR until they arrived, at which time paramedics rushed Savayah downstairs to the ambulance, followed by Luis, although they found him distracting and had Harris County Sheriff's Deputy David Papa take him out of the ambulance so they could focus on life-saving care for Savayah. Those paramedics noted that the baby wasn't breathing and had no pulse. They saw ligation marks around her neck and what appeared to be a thermal burn around her mouth. Savayah was wearing a urine-filled diaper they described as super soiled and hadn't been changed in a long time. In the ambulance on the way to the hospital, paramedics feared there was no hope for saving Savayah. Based on the pallor of her skin, her dilated pupils, her blood sugar reading, and her body temperature of 95.9 degrees Fahrenheit or 35.5 degrees Celsius at 12:36 a.m., they estimated that Savayah had been dead for at least 30 minutes. They didn't, however, pronounce her dead in the ambulance due to their protocol regarding children. When the ambulance arrived just before 1 a.m. at Texas Children's West Hospital in nearby Katy, Texas, hospital staff noted bruising on Savayah's forehead and a bruise on her left cheek that resembled a handprint, redness and peeling around her mouth, a bruise on her left knee, and scratches and abrasions on her neck. Her skin was cyanotic from lack of oxygen, and rigor mortis had already begun to set in around her jaw and neck, which is where it typically begins. At 1:12 a.m., Savayah's internal body temperature was recorded as 89.8 degrees Fahrenheit or 32.1 degrees Celsius. At 1:16 a.m. on August 24, 2020, 8-month-old Savayah Mason was pronounced dead. She hadn't even gotten her first tooth yet. I just want to mention that the normal temperature range for a baby at night is between 97.7 and 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit. When Savayah was rushed into the ambulance at 12:36 a.m., her temperature was 95.9 degrees Fahrenheit, so about 2 degrees below the lower normal range. Just over an hour later, at the hospital, her temperature had dropped 6.1 degrees. It's details like this where I really wish I could have obtained more information. I wonder if Savayah was swaddled in her car seat and what the temperature was in the sunroom. An adult human body cools at about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit per hour, but because they're a lot smaller, of course, infants cool faster. If she had been covered in blankets in a warm room, Savayah's temperature may have stayed closer to normal until she was taken to the ambulance, at which time she would have started to cool more rapidly. The Harris County Sheriff's Office immediately opened an investigation into Savayah's death. Harris County Sheriff's Deputy Shane Ward took photos of the baby's body at the hospital, noting raw spots around her mouth, bruising on the side of her face, and scratches on her neck and shoulder. He took a photo of her genital area because he believed that to be swollen and not normal. Meanwhile, at the crime scene, Deputy Papa, who had removed Luis from the ambulance, followed the upset father up to the apartment, which the deputy described as chaotic and smelled some like marijuana, old food, and urine. Deputy Papa and Deputy Jordan Davis detained all of the men in the apartment, including Luis, Trevante Moulton or Vaughn, Trevington Moulton or Juice, his partner Henry Matthews or Juvie, Ladarian Watson or L-Dog, and Ryan Jang, a friend but not a roommate. Juice and Ryan ultimately left before investigators could speak with them. Luis, who had just turned 23 9 days earlier, begged the deputies to let him go back to her, please, referring to Savayah at the hospital, but Deputy Papa ordered him to stay put while they looked through the apartment. When Deputy Papa asked Luis if Savayah had any health problems, Luis responded that she had a diaper rash, and that Yanis had told him Savayah was having trouble breathing, the same that she always does. Later at trial, Yanis would agree that Savayah had a diaper rash that weekend, but according to the appellate brief, she denied that her daughter had any other health issues or trouble breathing. The brief stated that Savayah's medical records showed that Yanis told the baby's doctor in February 2020 that she gasps at night while sleeping and had noisy inhalation with laying down and sometimes with crying. The brief said that the doctor diagnosed her with airway malacia at the time. This is a condition also known as floppy trachea, which means that instead of being stiff and holding its shape, the windpipe is soft and collapses easily, which can cause breathing issues. I don't have access to Savayah's medical records, so I can't say for sure whether or not this is true. What I do know is that that condition could in no way account for all of the horrible injuries the autopsy would later find. For what it's worth, the appeal document also makes a big deal out of the fact that Luis repeatedly asked to be with his daughter, as if that indicates innocence. It states that Luis was frantic, demanding that Deputy Papa let him go to the hospital, which the deputy refused. To me, that's hardly proof of innocence. Wouldn't someone who felt guilty about what he did to his daughter also be frantic to find out how she's doing, if for no other reason than to find out if he's going to be in trouble? While speaking with the deputy, Luis was forthcoming in establishing a timeline and admitted he was the last person to see Savayah alive. When Deputy Papa asked, "When was the last time you saw her and she was okay?" Luis responded, "I went to sleep like 7 o'clock, woke up barely out of my sleep. It was about an hour before this. She was good." When he woke up again, he said, "I woke up and seen my fucking daughter and was like, what the fuck?" He claimed the seatbelt part that was around her armpits was up around her neck, so he took her out of her car seat, but her eyes wouldn't open. Later, he insisted, "She was breathing, bro." Again, I wish I had access to more information about the case because I have so many unanswerable questions, like, considering the other roommates reported that the sunroom lights were off, did Luis turn them on to check Savayah? And if so, was that something he normally did when she stayed with him? Luis told Deputy Davis that Eunice told him about Savayah's breathing issues a few days before, and that she said Savayah was making a noise when she had trouble breathing, either asleep or awake. He added, "Her car seat was kind of moved. It wasn't the same way I left it." Deputy Papa's report noted that Luis smelled strongly of urine. When the deputy asked why his clothes were wet, Luis replied, "That's my daughter's pee from me holding her." At this point, Luis said he called Eunice over Instagram, telling her in a panic to go to the hospital. He told Eunice that he awoke to find Savayah with her neck down on the armpit part of the car seat. He insisted their daughter was breathing when he found her. Around the same time, a police officer at the hospital informed Deputy Papa that Savayah had died, although the deputy didn't tell Luis immediately, and instead continued questioning him. At 2:10 a.m., Deputy Investigator Jack Farrell arrived at the apartment and took Luis into his car to talk with him, where he told Luis about Savayah. "I don't know her condition right now." Luis told him that he had heard Savayah gasping but not opening her mouth while she slept. As for recent injuries, Luis claimed she hadn't had any except a diaper rash and normal injuries that a baby gets. I'm not sure what he was going for there. Infants Savayah's age don't typically get injuries on their own. Most injuries a baby would get either occur at birth or happen when the baby falls from a surface like a bed or changing table, or maybe when a family pet bites them. Neither was the case here. Luis denied knowing what the injury around Savayah's mouth was, but admitted he had noticed it. He also said that because Savayah slept without a shirt, she would have marks from the seatbelt in the car seat on her arm. Luis told Investigator Farrell that when he woke up and checked on Savayah, he saw her head was down and her eyes wouldn't open, so he panicked, tried to give CPR, and ran out of the sunroom yelling for help. Luis twice told the investigator he could hear Savayah breathing, which now seems impossible based on the baby's temperature taken in the ambulance and later at the hospital. As to whether any of the other men present had access to the baby, Luis told Investigator Farrell that he was real picky about who I let touch my child, and that the others may have held her for a few seconds, but no more than that. After obtaining Luis's consent to search the apartment, Investigator Farrell finally broke the terrible news. Your daughter did not survive. Luis reportedly exploded at the investigator for withholding this information from him. Investigator Farrell continued asking questions, including, Is there anything that you can think of that happened today that would have caused this? You need to tell me now if you know of something. Like if you saw something, if somebody did something, or you saw her fall. Luis replied fervently, No, the only time she ever falls is when I'm bathing her. He said she would have an old bruise on her forehead from the sink, but that's it. At that point, the body-worn camera footage shows Luis shutting down and crying for about a minute before saying, The only thing they told me was that it was probably SIDS. Earlier, body cam footage showed that Deputy Davis had mentioned SIDS to Luis as a possibility, but only as a theory. He certainly didn't suggest that it was probably the reason Savayah became unresponsive. My take, for what it's worth, is that Deputy Davis may just have been trying to comfort Luis, possibly not knowing that Luis would soon be in the crosshairs of a murder investigation. When the apartment was initially searched, Deputy Shane Ward, who had also taken photos of Savayah's body in the hospital, took pictures of the scene. The apartment was dirty, but there were no signs of forced entry. The deputy saw ashes, an ashtray, and a digital scale. Next to Luis's air mattress in the sunroom, he found the car seat, which he described as dirty. It was discolored and wet and smelled of urine, as did the sunroom overall, which Deputy Ward described as pretty filthy. Behind the car seat were a formula can, diapers, and trash. The deputy also found a bottle, some formula, and a squeezable food pouch in the kitchen. Time for another quick sponsor break. After investigators left in the early morning hours of August 24, 2020, the roommates returned to apartment 323. By this time, Luis knew his daughter had died, and according to his appellate brief, was unexpressive. L-Dog would later testify that Luis didn't care, and Juvie said Luis showed no remorse. According to Juice, everybody expressed their feelings different. Eunice arrived at the apartment soon afterward, later testifying that she thought Luis's behavior was a little weird. Something was off. At 10:26 that morning, Luis texted his fiancée, Ashley, asking her to come over. He, Yanis, and Ashley all went into the sunroom for a while. The appeal document made sure to mention, Luis never said anything to Yanis about hurting his child. I mean, duh. Why would he admit to hurting Savayah, especially in front of her mother and his fiancée? Assistant Medical Examiner Dr. Jennifer Ross conducted an autopsy on Savayah at 10:25 a.m. on August 24th at the Harris County Institute of Forensics, during which she found an unthinkable number of bruises and abrasions pretty much everywhere on this sweet little girl's tiny body, her scalp, face, neck, back, torso, legs, and even her fingers and toes. There was a handprint-shaped bruise on her face, consistent with a slap mark. She suffered from a brain bleed near the front of her head and petechial hemorrhaging that suggested asphyxiation. Injuries to her ribs, including a buccal fracture, indicated chest compression, but CPR couldn't be ruled out as the cause. Dr. Ross made note of the abrasions around Savayah's lips and inside her mouth, saying these were consistent with some sort of suffocation, putting something over the mouth with some movement. The autopsy found various thin, red abrasions along both sides of Savayah's scalp, angled and interrupted, as if caused by fingernails or some other rough surface during restraint. There were ligature marks on her little ankles. And this is a rare decision for me, because, as I always say, if these kids had to endure it, we can damn well hear about it. But for this next part, I just can't. I can't bring myself to go into detail here. What I will say is that this defenseless 8-month-old baby girl suffered from abrasions, contusions, chafing, and tears consistent with forceful sex. These injuries showed no sign of healing, which meant they were inflicted hours before, during the death, or right after the death. Dr. Ross also noted that a sexual assault kit was submitted, and she recovered a few tightly curled black hairs from inside the white pediatric body bag. Dr. Ross ruled Savayah's death a homicide caused by multiple blunt force injuries with suffocation and sexual assault. It was her opinion that Savayah had been dead for at least a couple of hours before her death was declared at 1:16 a.m., and that her death could have occurred as early as 6 o'clock p.m. on the 23rd. Acting on a search warrant on August 25th, Detective Wallace Wyatt and Deputy Kathy Hellstrom once again searched the apartment Luis shared with his 5 roommates. In the sunroom, which they described as messy and unkept, there was a black trash bag that hadn't been there in Detective Ward's crime scene photos from early on the 24th. Under the mattress, Deputy Hellstrom found a baby wipe that appeared to have blood on it. When she emptied the trash bag, she found 8 more soiled baby wipes. A probable cause document later read, "There was no diaper in the bag where the wipes were recovered." The wipes were seized as evidence, along with the baby's car seat, a pink onesie, a blanket found in the trash, a thermometer, and hair found on the blanket in the trash. While the search warrant was executed on the 25th, Luis, Yanis, Vaughn, Juice, and Juvie were taken to the sheriff's department for questioning. Luis was reportedly questioned for over 7 hours, and he was described as cooperative, giving investigators a DNA sample via buccal swab and allowing them to extract the contents of his cell phone. They also took DNA samples from Vaughn, Juice, and Juvie at the sheriff's department that day. Much later, in early 2023, they received DNA samples from L-Dog and Ryan Jang as well. Investigator Farrell obtained an arrest warrant, and on August 31, 2020, he arrested 23-year-old Luis Luna without incident. Luis was booked into Harris County Jail with no bond on a charge of capital murder of a victim under 10. Detective Wyatt received search warrants for Luis's phone and his records on Instagram, where his handle was ScrewGodLou. The second extraction of Luis's cell phone showed that he had a habit of watching adult pornography every few days, which isn't out of the ordinary for a lot of people. More concerning was the fact that he did so between 6 and 7:30 p.m. on August 23rd. After Luis's arrest, Harris County Sheriff Ed Gonzalez tweeted, "Heartbreaking. Worst type of cases. May this little angel rest in peace. Good job by our investigators and all involved." At Luis's probable cause hearing in magistrate court the day after his arrest, defense attorney Mark Hotchglobe was appointed to defend Luis, and the magistrate judge deferred a bond ruling to criminal district court. In the meantime, Luis was held without bond in the mental health unit at the Harris County Jail's 1200 Baker Street facility. Eunice created a GoFundMe campaign to help pay for Savayah's funeral. The campaign, which had an $8,000 goal, ultimately reached almost $9,000. She was able to have a funeral for Savayah despite COVID-19 restrictions. Loved ones were invited to attend via private live stream. Afterward, Savayah was laid to rest at Forest Park Westheimer Cemetery in Houston. In October 2021, another court-appointed public defender, Gerald K. Graber, joined the case. In the 1990s, Mr. Graber served as Harris County Assistant District Attorney for several years. Another public defender, Scott Pope, would eventually join the defense team, and after Luis's trial, Mr. Pope would go on to work for the DA's office. Luis was re-indicted twice after his initial indictment in 2020. Each time, the accusations were increasingly horrific. By the third and final indictment in July 2024, Luis was accused of causing Savayah's death by blocking her nose and mouth with his hand and an unknown object, by applying pressure to her throat with his hand, a charging cable, a neck gaiter, and an unknown object, and by striking her with his hand and with and against a blunt object. Part of the charge included the accusation that the murder occurred while Luis was committing or attempting to commit aggravated sexual assault of his daughter. Luis's jury trial began on September 23, 2024, with Judge Hilary Diane Unger presiding. Harris County Child Fatality Assistant District Attorney Edward A. Applebaum prosecuted the case alongside fellow Assistant District Attorney Sarah Delgado. Unfortunately, very little about that trial made it into the media, and it seems even the trial transcripts cannot be released to the public. I do know that Savayah's mom, Eunice, attended the trial and was called to testify, although she couldn't provide much information because she wasn't present in the apartment when Savayah died. The jury received the case for deliberations on October 2, 2024, after 7 days of testimony. They returned the following day with a verdict: guilty of capital murder, as charged in the indictment. Sentencing commenced the same day, at which one of the prosecutors read Eunice's victim impact statement to the court. Luis received an automatic sentence of life without parole. Afterward, Prosecutor Applebaum told reporters that Savayah's murder was one of the most horrific acts of violence imaginable. It's the worst kind of evil in the world. In an exclusive interview with Click 2 Houston, Mr. Applebaum said of Eunice,
her daughter was brutally murdered, taken from her too early, and so, she didn't get to ever celebrate her first birthday. She didn't get to take her to pre-K, see her take her first steps or any of that stuff. So she missed out on all that stuff because of what this man did.
How difficult are cases like this?
They're difficult because they involve children, and especially a child of this age. I mean, she couldn't walk, she couldn't talk. She had no voice, and so the jury really was the voice for this little girl and spoke for her by its verdict.
In a statement, District Attorney Kim Ogg said, "This baby couldn't walk or talk, and she should have been with someone who kept her safe, but instead he abused that trust. Children are the most vulnerable victims in our community, and the people who hurt them often try to escape accountability. That is why we have specialized prosecutors working in the child fatality section." 27-year-old Luis Luna, Texas Department of Criminal Justice inmate number 2527282, is listed on the Harris County District Clerk's website as black with brown eyes and black hair, standing 5 feet 9 inches tall, and weighing 145 pounds. He is currently serving his life sentence in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice McConnell Unit in Beeville, Texas. That's the same prison as another notorious daughter killer, Yasser Saeed, who fatally shot his 2 teenage daughters, Amina and Sarah, on January 1, 2008, leaving their bodies in an abandoned taxicab in Irving, Texas. The highly controlling father felt his daughters had dishonored the family by dating non-Muslims and refusing to enter arranged marriages. I find it unsettlingly coincidental that Saeed, who had evaded arrest for his daughter's murders for 12 years, was arrested on August 26, 2020, just 2 days after Savayah's murder. Immediately after his trial ended, Luis's attorneys filed his intent to appeal before withdrawing from his case. The court appointed a new public defender, Angela Cameron. When the appeal brief was filed in March 2025, it stated that Louise's counsel of record was Chief Public Defender Alexander Boonin and Assistant Public Defender Douglas Gladden, the latter of whom prepared and signed the brief. Louise's grounds for appeal are that the evidence was legally insufficient to support his capital murder conviction, that the court excluded evidence the defense thought should have been included, and that the jury instructions were incorrect or incomplete. After an extension was granted, the state of Texas has until May 28, 2025 to file its response. I'll keep an eye on the appeal and provide any updates on the Facebook page. Now, time for one last sponsor break. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, my sources were severely limited. I don't know what the prosecution's theory was for the murder. I wish I did. All I can do is speculate. If, after the state files its response to Louise's appeal, that response brief contains a lot more valuable information, I'll release a mini-sode as an addendum to this episode. For right now, though, based on the facts that I do know, I want to share my hypothesis about what may have happened on the evening of August 23, 2020, and I'm interested to know what you all think. This isn't speculation for shock value, but a tragic, disturbing, and sadly plausible theory based on documented behavior, physical evidence, and known drug effects. I'll start with the facts, at least as I know them. 1. In text messages, Louise referenced getting a gram of some kind of drug, likely cocaine, on the afternoon of August 23, 2020. His subsequent text message to his fiancée that "we gon' see," the letter C, straight, lends itself to the theory that the drug was cocaine. Some people describe cocaine's initial effects as helping them get straight or see clearly. Cocaine use can bring about hypersexuality, lowered impulse control, violent outbursts, and aggression. Even small doses can disinhibit a person. And if that person is already hypersexual, which it's entirely possible that Screw God Lou, who apparently had multiple girlfriends at a time, was, then that disinhibition could possibly lead to sexual violence. 2. At 4 p.m., Louise sent Yanis a photo of their daughter, which he hadn't taken that day but instead 3 days before. 3. Just after 6 p.m. that day, Louise texted his girlfriend, Ashley, to tell her he was going to lie down with the baby for a nap. 4. The police's second extraction of Louise's cell phone showed that he watched adult pornography every few days, and that he did so between 6 and 7:30 p.m. on August 23rd, while supposedly lying down with the baby for a nap. 5. Louise's phone was locked from 8:55 p.m. until 11:43 p.m., a nearly 3-hour period during which no one could reach him. 6. The injuries Dr. Ross found during the autopsy that indicated sexual assault showed no signs of healing, which the medical examiner said meant the injuries were inflicted within a few hours of death. She placed the time of death as early as 6 p.m. on the 23rd, saying Savayah had died at least a couple of hours before her death was declared. My hypothesis based on these facts is that Louise likely took a bump of cocaine not long before he started watching porn. The cocaine would have exacerbated sexual arousal, and remember, it also has a disinhibiting effect and can make people aggressive and violent. All of this, combined with the fact that there was only one helpless individual in the room with him who couldn't yet speak and therefore couldn't tell on him, may have led him to do the unthinkable to his own little girl. I'm definitely interested to hear if you think I'm way off base and what your theories are. In the almost 5 years since Savayah's murder, her mommy, Yanis, has been blessed with 2 more beautiful children. She now has a 2-year-old son and a 1-year-old daughter who keep her very busy. Her favorite memories are of sitting outside on the patio with Savayah throughout the day. She told me that she's still grieving and learning how to keep Savayah's memory alive. For now, she said, she sings happy birthday to Savayah every year on December 7th. Savayah should be 5 today. She'd probably be getting ready to start kindergarten in the fall and playing with her little brother and sister. Like many parents I've talked to, Yanis sees signs that Savayah is still watching over her. She said she sees a lot of feathers and believes that's Savayah's way of letting her know she's always with her. Savayah Simone Mason was a sweet, happy baby. She liked watching the TV shows Masha and Bear and Sofia the First. Although she couldn't walk by herself, she especially loved playing in her walker. I'm so grateful to Yanis for trusting me to tell her sweet girl's story and giving me the privilege of helping her keep Savayah's memory alive. My sources for this episode were Click2 Houston, KIRO 7, the Harris County Sheriff's Office website, the Office of Harris County District Clerk website, People, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice website, official reports and documents, and Yanis Mason. Shoutouts to my newest patrons. Thank you to Kat M. from Christian Island, Ontario, Canada, Jess R. from Mount Sterling, Illinois, and from Dr. Frankenfurter's Castle, thank you to Sasha H., Hannah, Lori F., and Erica H. I appreciate you all so much. I know I haven't been making as many episodes as I used to, so your support means more to me than you'll ever know. It's helping me keep making episodes at all while I'm working myself ragged. Hugs to every one of my patrons who's stuck with me. To help support the show, you can visit patreon.com/stlcpod. And remember, supporting my sponsors also helps keep the show going. So don't forget to check out Magic Mind's limited time offer for a 60% discount off your subscription using my code LAINE60 at magicmind.com/LAINEMF. That info will also be in the show notes. That's it for this episode. Join me next time for another child's story. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. And please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com. You can support the show by visiting patreon.com/stlcpod, where you can become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to exclusive gifts. You can also support the show at ko-fi.com/stlcpod. Follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Suffer the Little Children Pod and on TikTok at STLCpod. View photos related to today's episode on Facebook. This podcast is researched, written, hosted, edited, and produced by Laine. Intro theme music is by Dream Note Music, and all music for the show is licensed from audiojungle.net. For more information about preventing or reporting child abuse, visit childhelp.org or call your area's child abuse hotline. And remember, if you see something, say something.